Gentlemen, a very warm welcome to today's webinar, where we're looking at a guide to intelligently selecting an e-invoicing solution which is right for you. So I extend to you a very warm welcome. My name is Susie West and I am your presenter for today. I have been working in the finance and accounting shared services market since about 1999 and spent about 5 of those years specifically selling electronic invoicing technology to shared services organizations in the US and also in Europe. So I'm really going to be drawing on that experience to extend a lot of best practice information for today. I stopped selling electronic invoicing in 2007 to set up sharedserviceslink.com. Many of you are very aware of what we do. We provide best practice information to the market via our conferences, our webinars, such as this one today, through masterclasses and through our website. Do become a member. It is free, and you do have access to much more information from our website. This session, as I mentioned, it's presented by me, and we're going to be going into a lot of detail. So if you have any technical queries, please do use the free panel GoToWebinar box that you've got, the free text panel on your GoToWebinar panel. If you've got any queries, we do have people on the line that can come back to you if you have technical queries. Really importantly though, I'm sure you've got a lot of questions. Please do use the free text box to submit those questions to me, and we will be allowing for questions in the last 10 minutes of the webinar. So let's crack on. We've got a lot of material to work through today. This is what the agenda looks like. We're going to kick off with what the intention of this session is. I'm going to then move into defining what we mean by invoicing. We mainly know what the drivers are, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the drivers so we're all on the same page. And then let's get into the real subject matter, which is when is the right time for e-invoicing, scoping out the project, building the business case, building the project team which will give you the success you're after, really understanding your key requirements and how you go to the marketplace, making sure that you know those requirements fully, and then how you are armed and ready to review the market. How do you actually tell the difference between all the providers that are out there and know the ones that will serve your intentions? And how do you weight responses when they're coming back to you on, for example, RFPs that you might issue out to the market? How to make a selection, and then a summary of all this good stuff, and then closing with 10 minutes of questions. So in terms of what the intention of this session is, before we go into this, I'd actually just like to ask everyone on the call. We've got over 100 people on this webinar today, which is fantastic. So I just want to gauge from the people that are on the call what your current e-invoicing penetration is today. So have a look at that question. What percentage of your invoices are electronic today? I'm going to move through the polls slightly quicker than we normally do. We normally allow a minute for polls responses. We're going to allow about 30 seconds because, as I say, a lot of material to get through today. So if I can ask you to respond, we've got about 60% of you that have responded, please. The rest of you, please do respond accordingly. Are you at 0%, 1 to 10%, 11 to 30, 31 to 60, or over 61%? 70% of you have responded. I'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results. So you can see here about 42% of you have between 1 and 10% electronic. 23% of you are at 0. 11% of you are at 61% or more. So very interesting indeed. We are now going to move to another poll. And hopefully you're going to be seeing the difference between the two. This poll is very much looking at where you want to be in 12 months' time. So what percentage of your invoices are you planning to have converted to electronic in 12 months' time? So if I asked you this question in 12 months, January 2012, how many invoices are converted to electronic today? What are you aiming for? So we've had 54% of you responding, waiting for those numbers to go up. We had 70 respond to the first one. If we can have 70% of you respond to this one, that would give us a very clear view of what kind of progress we're all looking at. So 71% of you have responded. Let's close this poll. and have a look at the responses. I know we do have some vendors on the line today, and they're very welcome indeed, and I think they'll be delighted by these results. So we had about 23% of you ticking the 0 box initially. We have 0% of you ticking that box this time. So we can see that there's a real hunger for adoption of e-invoicing. 34% of you, as opposed to, I think it was 11% of you, want to have over 60% converted. So I'd love to have you all come back this time next year. I'd like to hold on to those results and actually see where we're all at in 12 months' time. But we're all looking to get going with our e-invoicing project. So that's very encouraging indeed. Right. So let's have a look at what the intention of this session actually is. Okay. The market is still young, as you're probably very aware, and if I look at just the European market, where the figure that is generally talked about, it's about 30 billion invoices are exchanged in Europe each year, and between 5 and 10% of those are currently electronic, pure electronic today, which means 90 to 95% are still manual. So the need is absolutely massive, as you can see. And the danger is, though, when we buy into e-invoicing, it's likely that we have never, ever bought into an e-invoicing project before. This means people that buy into it and companies that buy into it are confused by messages that come out into the market. There is naivety that pervades the market, and sometimes decisions that are made can sometimes be based on misinformation, simply because companies haven't been tooled up to ask the right questions. So this session is to serve as a tool for you to hopefully help you select the kind of solution that is absolutely right for you. So let's be clear about what we mean about electronic invoicing. What we talk about at sharedserviceslink.com when we refer to e-invoicing is we're talking about largely about the network model. We're not talking about point-to-point as such. When we refer to point-to-point, we kind of refer to that as EDI. And many companies, especially in automotive and retail, were very successful rolling out EDI in the late 70s, 80s, 90s with their very high volume suppliers, but realized that they couldn't get any further. We're not talking about point-to-point kind of EDI technology. We're talking about many-to-many, any-to-any open networks which can be plugged into by many suppliers and many buyers. So that's what we talk about when we talk about e-invoicing. Also, when we talk about e-invoicing, we're talking about it from the accounts payable perspective, not the accounts receivable perspective. And we're not talking about PDFs and the emailing of PDFs. We're talking about computer-to-computer data flow. So this is when a supplier generates an invoice in their own billing system, and that data is then sent to a particular service provider, translated into a format that you can receive, and then drop straight into your system. So system-to-system, touchless processing. And when it's successful, it means that there are no touch points. So this is what we mean by e-invoicing. Let's have a quick look, and it's going to be a quick look because, as I say, I'm keen to get into the meat of this presentation at what the key drivers are today. And many of them will chime with you. The key drivers for e-invoicing are largely around cost reduction, and better control within the organization, a better view of what your liabilities are, a better understanding of what your cash position is, again, what your liabilities are, and what your cash flow position is and will be, cash flow forecasting. Also, cash in the bank isn't reaping a lot in terms of interest at the moment, so if you can pay suppliers earlier, it means that you can make your cash work harder for you and exercise early payment discounts. So e-invoicing allows for that. That's a very big driver for the European market, as we're seeing right now, and also to improve service delivery as far as shared services organizations are concerned. So you can see the diagram that we've got here. This is the ideal process flow that electronic invoicing enables. With walking through the numbers, point number one, electronic purchase order is raised, and it's the it's approved within within procurement, it's issued to the supplier acknowledges and confirms the PO, the goods or the services are rendered at point number 3. If there is a goods receipt note to be registered in the ERP, it is at point number 4. And then the supplier at point number 5 sends an e-invoice to the buyer. It three-way matches with the purchase order information and the goods receipt note in the system. So it matches either two-way or three-way, and it posts ready for electronic payment. The beauty of what e-invoicing enables here is that there are 3 touch points primarily in the buyer side, but you'll notice that none of them exist in the finance function. And this feeds into the driver of service for shared services, where shared services are realizing that they no longer want to be just keying in data and being a data cruncher. They want to have that done on an automated basis so that the skills that they have in shared services can then move up a level or quite a few levels so that they can start using that data and providing important management information and business intelligence to the business to help give them a competitive edge. So when is the right time for e-invoicing? And this is a key question. So my focus for this particular area is driven really by 4 key questions. So if you ask yourself, how many invoices do you currently process today? What is your first-time match rate? What percentage of invoices are centralized? And what would you do with an electronic invoice on receipt of it? So how many invoices do you process today? Why is this a key question? It's a key question because of business case. When I speak to people, I'm often asked the question, what's the cut-off point for invoices, and when do you start to have a business case for electronic invoicing? In my view, if you're receiving them on a centralized basis, you're normally looking around 40,000 invoices per annum. So I think anything that's lower than that, you may struggle to have a business case, and you may want to wait until most suppliers in the market, or a good number of suppliers in the market, are already signed up or connected to an electronic invoicing network, and you may want to wait until the e-invoicing has become mainstream and therefore may be a little cheaper, and your business case might stack up. But I wouldn't, if you are processing 30,000 invoices or less, I wouldn't want to deter you from doing electronic invoicing. It just means that it might be a bit harder on the business case. Chances are you've got 2 or 3 people in accounts payable processing those 30,000 invoices. If you put in electronic invoicing, you may still have 2 or 3 people. So you might have other drivers to do electronic invoicing instead. What is your first-time match rate? Well, this is a key question because you want your first-time match rate to be relatively high, and what you don't want is to try and convert to electronic the broken process that you've got in a manual world. So if 50% of your invoices are broken today and they bounce, then maybe they should be out of scope for this project, and that will leave you with a number that's in scope for the project. And you just need to be sure of what that number is. Is it 50,000? Is it 500,000? But you just want to be sure of what your first-time match rate is. If your first-time match rate is very, very low, then perhaps I would urge you to put your energy in the next 6 months to getting that match rate up nice and high, or as high as it can be, so you've got a business case for electronic invoicing. But I urge you to, if you've got a very high bounce rate, it might not be an idea to try and convert those to electronic just yet. What percentage of your invoices are centralized? Very, very key question. This is primarily why a lot of e-invoicing service providers pitch their wares to the shared services market, because all of these invoices are coming into one location, and it is in that setup that a business case exists. If you have 200,000 invoices coming into 10 accounts payable departments across Europe, and then you try and move to electronic, you'll still probably have 2 people in those accounts payable departments doing other account payable chores. So if you centralize and you've got 20 people processing 200,000 invoices, you could reduce that headcount down to 5 or 6 quite considerably. So what percentage of your invoices are centralized? If it's 100%, then again, you're in a really good place to get going with your e-invoicing project. What would you do with the electronic invoice on receipt? Ideally, you have some kind of workflow technology in place. If you do, great. It means that you'll be able to treat the invoice and send it out to the appropriate person in the organization if it doesn't match. But if you don't have a workflow technology in place, what are you going to do with the invoice that doesn't match and it bounces? So these are just questions that you need to ask yourself. That will then take you very nicely onto being able to scope out the project. So in terms of scoping out the project, again, 4 kind of key areas that I would focus on is what your invoices per annum is, or what your number of invoices per annum is, what your supplier base looks like, countries that you have in scope, and the processes or the steps, activities that you would like in scope for the project. So let's start with the first point. In terms of invoices and scope, most shared services organizations, and I'm sure that most of the organizations on the line today, probably processing between 100,000 and 10 million invoices. The higher up that you go in terms of those numbers, again, the more compelling the business case will be. And also, it's probably fair to say the more successful your project will be. Reason being, if you're processing 5, 10 million, if you're processing 500,000 invoices a year, chances are you've got some fairly high volume suppliers in there. And meeting with those suppliers and getting them onto your e-invoicing service provider platform, you may be leaping through your program very, very quickly, because if you've got one supplier sending you maybe 30,000 invoices per annum, if you convert that supplier, you're going to be making some fairly swift gains in your e-invoicing project. So it's good to know what your volume is, and it's also very important to know where the 80% of your invoice volume is coming from. I'm fairly certain that most of you on the webinar today, if you looked at your invoices that were sent to you in the last 12 months, you probably recognize that 80% of them came from 10 or 20% of your supply base. So that really, in my mind, that would be where your energy should be focused. And if you can just get those 20% of suppliers on board, then you've pretty much cracked your e-invoicing project. And it's good because it means that if you've got 10,000 suppliers, then maybe only 80% of your invoices are coming from 1 or 2,000 of those suppliers. And it makes the e-invoicing project much more manageable when you look at it like that. Then you need to look at really what your current technology is today in terms of what you do with invoices when they bounce. Do you have some kind of workflow technology in place? Do you have an auto-matching technology in place? If you really want to get to touchless processing, you need to make sure that when your electronic invoice data comes in, that you have some kind of auto-matching technology in place to match the invoice with a purchase order and the goods receipt note, if it's required, at a line level. You don't really want to be able to match that manually. And then to send out to the business the invoices that fail in some kind of workflow engine. So you can really automate it very elegantly indeed. Again, just in terms of scope, you might want to leave non-PO out of scope for now. That's up for debate. We're familiar with organizations that have converted non-PO very, very nicely, but people would generally agree that the PO invoice area is the good area to start with. So moving on, in terms of scoping the project, again, what does the supply base look like? So become very familiar with your supply base. If you haven't cleaned it up, then do so. If you haven't consolidated it, now is the time to do so. Have a look at the live suppliers that have been trading with you in the last 12 months. Who do you have strategic relationships with? Be very aware of those. Who are your strategic suppliers? Who are your contractual suppliers? In terms of suppliers that you might use across the business, do you know about the other relationship that, say, France or Germany or the States has with Dell or HP or whoever? But get familiar with the overall company relationship with the suppliers. It will help you get these suppliers on much quicker, and also it will help you recognize the value of that trading relationship with that supplier. Domestically, you might only spend X amount with that particular supplier, but obviously, if you look at it right across the kind of the global aspect, then obviously that relationship will be worth much more in terms of value, and you will have a greater position to get them on board on your e-invoicing project much quicker. do become familiar with the 80-20 rule, become very familiar of the 20% of suppliers that are sending you 80% of your invoice volume. They are the suppliers that are key to get on board. Also be familiar with the suppliers that are already connected to something with you. Now this could be, they could already be on a P-card program, they may already be doing an ERS or no self-billing program with you, they may already be connected to an EDI. Just familiarize yourself with those suppliers and just consider, are they in scope or out of scope for your e-invoicing project. Similarly, if you're very close to some of your bigger suppliers, maybe they're already connected to an e-invoicing network. Again, just familiarize yourself with who perhaps they're already connected to, and that really might determine who you end up selecting in the short to medium term. Let's have a look at this graph here, which will be coming up on your screen shortly. So you can see here in terms of scoping out a project, in terms of a supplier base, yes, you've always got this kind of curve, the supplier curve, and e-invoicing is I would never say that it's a solution for 100% of your suppliers or 100% of your invoices. E-invoicing is a very strong contender and a great solution for a very large percentage of your invoices. But to go for 100%, I would say is probably being a bit unrealistic. I think what is typical and certainly what is good is to be in the mid-80s. Actually, that's really where the best practice companies are. They're in the mid-80s space, and most organisations will aim to kind of get to the 70%. So just bear in mind that the small suppliers, they may be better to have for a P-card program, or they may be great for an e-invoicing program, but they will be looking to perhaps use the part of the solution that a service provider offers, which is a portal where they can key their information in online. Just to be clear, most service providers have two propositions and two solutions for the supplier, your supplier base. They'll have the kind of login and key your invoice into a form online, and this would be like a bit of a supplier portal. They may even be able to pick up purchase orders online there as well. The bulk of your invoice volume, however, will come from the other suppliers that are high volume suppliers that will go for more of an integrated solution with your service provider. And it's important, and we'll come on to technology in just a moment, it's important for these suppliers to plug into the service provider's kind of network in a very simple fashion, without having to do lots of things to their IT, without having to conform to certain formats. So you want to make it technologically, you want to make it very simple for them. So bear in mind that normally there are two routes that a supplier can send an invoice to you. The low volume suppliers will use a kind of web form, and the high volume suppliers will use some kind of integrated file procedure. Okay, so if we have a look at this pie, we did a survey quite recently, and it was really just to ask the market. We did this with about 40 shared services organisations, and the question really was, where do 80% of your invoices actually come from? And you can see here that 50% of respondents said that 80% of their invoices came from 10% of suppliers. And that really is quite a powerful message. Again, it just means that you really just need to understand those suppliers and then focus your energy on that group of suppliers. So in terms of countries and scope, now this is key as well. So if you look at your operations across Europe, again, where do 80% of your invoice volume actually come from in terms of countries? And referring back to the survey that we did quite recently, again with this group of about 40 shared services organisations, you can see here that 65% of respondents receive 80% of their invoice volumes from between 1 and 4 countries. Again, you're probably on the line right now thinking, well, I've got 20 countries that we service from our shared services centre in Manchester or wherever. But if you look into the detail, probably the 80% of those invoices are only coming from a small number of countries. And again, It just means it makes the e-invoicing project much more manageable. So we asked this group of 40 which countries do those invoices come from, and you can see there's a kind of a trend here. The popular ones were the UK market, Germany, Italy, France. So you can, again, we've got about 100 shared services organisations on this webinar right now. If we did a quick poll to find out about countries, you could pretty much vouch that you share, your key countries are quite consistent amongst the group. And this is great because this means that the key countries for you have been the key countries for other shared services organisations who were early adopters of e-invoicing. So I think you can take advantage of the work that they have already done with working in this market, specifically around e-invoicing. So I think you are in a very strong position to make sure that you see success with your e-invoicing project. And finally, looking at scoping out the project, what activities are you looking to have within e-invoicing? So are you just looking for e-invoicing, or are you also looking for other functions as well? Now, this will become clear when you start building your business case. So when organizations put together a business case for e-invoicing, they'll normally start with a quick and dirty business case on the back of a beer mat or a fag packet, and it would just be a very, very high level business case. And that's normally how many people do we have in accounts payable, how much are we paying them, and how many invoices do we process. You do a very quick sum to realise it's costing you £2 to £20 to process a paper invoice today. And that should be enough for you to realise, okay, let's look into this. There might be something there in terms of putting together a proper business case and going ahead with e-invoicing. When you get past the kind of the high-level business case, then you start looking at your as-is process and mapping it out. And this will really tell you how many touch points you have, how many FTEs are involved in the process, and how much time is actually spent. The result is a much clearer view of what your key pain points are, a clearer idea of the actual solution that you need, and it will boil it down to a very clear idea of what your cost per invoice is. You can get quite detailed in this project. Some people literally want to follow a very, very strict kind of Six Sigma or Lean Sigma approach. The one company I'm aware of, they followed the life of an invoice around the world and interviewed people that touched it so that they could really get under the skin of the process and understand it fully. And obviously that was quite an administrative and expensive approach, but they did come away with a very clear idea of exactly what that as-is process was. Importantly, I think it's key to note when you are mapping out your as-is process, not just to focus on the AP piece, but to map out your process end to end and include the procurement piece in that as well. So in terms of building the business case, important considerations, of course, are the headcount savings that you're looking to have. And that will have an impact, obviously, on the business case quite considerably. What will have an even bigger impact on the business case is the discount savings that you'll be able to realise, and that's key. So do factor that in as well, and do work quite closely with procurement to make sure that you really are budgeting for the right amount of discounts. Do see it as a kind of a value case, a business case, not a cost case. So when you finally, all this work's been done internally, you haven't even gone to the market yet to see what's out there. But when you go to the market and you start getting commercials back from the service providers, just be sure that when you finish doing your business case, you're not looking at it from a cost perspective. E-invoicing is not a commodity. So if somebody's offering you 7 or 8 pence to process an invoice and somebody else is offering you a lot more, the question you really need to ask is how many invoices can we genuinely convert to electronic? It will be of much more importance to you to make sure you get to, say, 80+% conversion and you paying 50 pence or £1 an invoice, rather than you only seeing 10% conversion but you paying 5 or 10 pence an invoice. So just be sure about this. And that takes me on to my next point. Just be sure of what the ramp-up is. E-invoicing is not something that happens overnight. It is a service. And so when procurement is negotiating with the service providers, they need to account for this. It's not a commodity. They're not buying gas, for example. They are buying a service. So you need to account for the ramp-up because, yes, you won't be able to convert 100% of invoices overnight. What we normally see is perhaps 40 to 50% converted in the first 12 months, around 70 to 80 in the first 24 months. Do have in mind that from the moment you decide to go live with your e-invoicing project, you'll have a kick-off, you'll sign a contract, you'll have a kick-off. You probably won't see your first live transaction for 3 months. So again, count that in, factor that in to your business case. Okay, again, we still haven't gone to the market yet. This is still stuff to be done internally around the prep side. As far as the project team is concerned, this is not an IT project. IT is involved, but only for a very short period of time. And actually, it's not a project, it's a program. And the key people that really need to be involved to make sure that this is going to be successful it's key to have a high-level sponsor that backs you every step of the way and gets it, and they will not let this project be undermined at all. It's key to have IT involved because a data flow will be coming to your organization, so they just need to be able to be comfortable with where that's going to go and how that's going to liaise with other technology that you've got. But after a while, they may step away from the project or the program and not be engaged anymore. Really, this is a procurement and a finance project. Procurement needs to be involved in a very, very big way. And I urge you that if you haven't yet engaged procurement and you're thinking about doing e-invoicing, stop now and go and get procurement involved. If that's one thing that you take away from this webinar, I'd be pleased that it would be that, please. If you try and do it by yourself, just as a finance operation, I hate to say these words, but it will fail, because ultimately what e-invoicing is about is a supplier onboarding program, and the person in the organization or the group in the organization that owns the supplier relationship ultimately is procurement and not finance. So you must have procurement on board to make this happen. So do get them on board early. Have them on your project team. Then we're looking at finance rep and a kind of a program shape project manager. And sometimes that will be the procurement rep or it would be the finance rep. Sometimes it's both working together. Okay. Understanding your requirements. Now, this is key because before you go out to market and you go out to assess what's out there, you do really need to know what your requirements are. So you need to know what your as-is process is, and that will determine where your shortfalls are. You need to know what your functional requirements are, your country requirements are, and your business requirements, your business case requirements. So in terms of functional requirements, just understand, is it an end-to-end or a single step that you're looking to cover with your e-invoicing solution, and what solutions are already in place that might help your business case be even better. What ERP do you use? What do you want your e-invoicing solution to do? Do you want all the other functionality like PO flip and PO acknowledgement, etc.? So what kind of things do you actually want it to do? So it's very important that you have the answer to these questions before you go out and start meeting providers. In terms of the country requirements, just know your key countries, and then when you go to the market, you must understand what kind of VAT position each of the service providers has for those markets, and we'll come on to that in just a moment. But also, importantly, language requirements. If you have a lot of Spanish suppliers, are you okay with them to be onboarded in English, or do you want them onboarded by a native who is obviously fluent in their mother tongue of Spanish? So these are the kinds of questions that you need to be asking your service provider. Again, we'll come on to these in just a moment in a bit more detail. In terms of your business case or your business requirements, the business case is key. Also, what's your cash position? Are you okay with some kind of upfront commitment? Be aware that service providers out there, a lot of them are still young organizations. They might not be in the strongest cash position as other established businesses, so they might welcome an upfront commitment and maybe a lower transaction fee along the way. So just model it and be creative in the way that you think that you can pay for this. And just be sure about what kind of ROI you're looking at. Most organizations are looking for an ROI within about the first 2 years, and that's generally realistic if you follow the best practice guidelines that your service provider will share with you. Also, in terms of a guarantee, a lot of service providers offer a guarantee these days if you follow their best practice guidelines. Just look into what the detail of that guarantee actually is. And if I were running a project, I'd want to have the guarantee in place. And also understand what your resource requirements are at your end. How many people do you need to plug into this program to make it work? And how much of their time, is it a 6-month project, is it a 12-month project, is it indeed a program where somebody's going to have to be on it at all times. Typically what you'll see is one person having to be full-time on this program for about 6 months and then maybe moving into half-time, as it were, for the following 6 months. After 80%, it might just go into a kind of operational project where it doesn't actually need a lot of devotion as such. It's become the mainstream in the organization. But just become aware of what your resource availability is and what the resource requirements of e-invoicing actually is. Right, that takes us to the position where now we're ready to review the markets. So it's really key that you've done this kind of pre-work before you go to the market. Unfortunately, I don't recommend that you do any kind of shortcutting. It won't aid you in the long term. So do make sure that you've followed those steps before you've actually gone to the market. So you can see here there are about 400 service providers in Europe alone saying that they do e-invoicing. And you know, I find that confusing as somebody that's very aware of the movements in this market. You know, I find that a very confusing message. So what you need to do just to start separating the wheat from the chaff is getting to grips with what do those service providers actually mean. We talk about, when we talk e-invoicing, we are talking about the networks. And so that's question number one. Are you a network or aren't you a network? And a lot of e-invoicing providers aren't a network. They just have the capacity to take an electronic file, but that really isn't that difficult. So, and they may focus on many, many other things and may only have a very small volume of transactions coming through in this particular, through this electronic invoicing channel. So I would already, if I was doing e-invoicing as a shared services organization, I would only really want to be talking to the service providers that function as a network. So this is really looking at what kind of questions do you need to ask to tell them apart, and why does it matter? Well, really it matters because it is a big investment, e-invoicing, and you know, you are moving away from the post office or the receipt of paper invoicing, and you're moving into a way of receiving invoices which you hope will be the way that you'll receive them in the long term. So you need to get this piece right. You need to be sure about your decision, because hopefully you'll be doing e-invoicing with the same provider for the next 5, 10, 20 years. Ultimately, they're the provider that's going to be, in a way, locking in your supply. So you need to be sure that you're making the right decision. And I've already mentioned it's vital that you have done the work that we've just talked about before you go into the marketplace. So how do you tell the difference between the different service providers? I've really split it into 6 key areas. So if I was going to put an RFP together, I'd be looking at supplier onboarding, VAT status, are you an open or closed network, technology, financials and stability of the business, and then actual business case. So in terms of supplier onboarding, these are the questions I'd ask. And again, if you're going to just put a requirements document together for your own sake, or you're actually going to put an RFP document together to put out to the market, this is what I would focus your RFP or your requirements document on. have a huge chapter on supplier onboarding and ask these kinds of questions. How do you involve suppliers? I'd be looking for answers like, well, we clean the supplier database to make sure that when we communicate with suppliers, we're talking to the right kinds of suppliers. We help you write the letter, and we'll help you draft a really strong, powerful letter that will work. We've got templates of good letters, templates of letters that haven't worked so well, and you can choose which one you'd like to go for. You want the service providers to chase up the suppliers for you. You don't want to be calling them. That's not your skill set. That's the skill set of the service provider, and let them get on with it. You want the service provider to sign them up and technically set them up. It's fiddly. You don't want to be involved in that, so let them get on with it. And you want them to understand that they will work with procurement to deal with the non-compliant suppliers and find a way to get them on board quickly. The question I would also ask is how many full-time equivalents in your organization are involved in supplier onboarding. So when talking to the service providers, this is a question I would ask them. You want their response to be high. I reiterate the point that e-invoicing is about onboarding suppliers, and it will work when you have enough suppliers on board. So having people in the organization and within your service provider doing this and doing it well is absolutely key. Can we come see them? I would ask to do that, and you should be allowed to come and spend the afternoon with them and sit down next to them. After all, these are the people that are calling your suppliers, some of them your strategic suppliers. You want them to be polished individuals that you would recruit, so you want to make sure that they're going to be doing a good job. Critically, you want to see how many of your suppliers are already connected to various networks. You may be pleasantly surprised at how many suppliers are already connected. So again, that might influence the decision. Can we meet the program manager? Again, program managers are key. E-invoicing is a project that touches your suppliers, but also touches the internal mechanics of your organization, especially across procurement. You need a particular type of person to make this work. So when you go to your service provider, meet with the program managers and select one and tie them into the contract, because you need somebody who's going to really make this work and who won't take no for an answer and will push things through and is really quite resilient. So knowing your program manager before you sign a contract is absolutely key. Moving on to VAT status, questions that you need to ask. The worst thing that you can hear as somebody that's looking to buy e-invoicing, if you ask the question, what's your VAT situation, VAT status, if you hear them say, oh, we comply with the EU directive, that's not what you want to hear, and it's not good enough. As many of you know on the line today, the EU directive comes out with various messages on e-invoicing, but each country has their own interpretation of the EU directive, and the e-invoicing providers have to comply with each country's interpretation. So it's at that kind of local level that they need to be compliant. So you need to understand exactly which countries they are legally compliant in and where they don't have any kind of paper invoice to back up an electronic document. It needs to be a pure e-invoice flow that they're using in countries, and you need to have the kind of the guarantee that they are legally compliant in those countries. You need to find out how they are complying with local law in terms of archiving. And who do you work with in terms of securing compliance? Do you work with PwC? Do you work with Deloitte? Do you work with KPMG? Who is it that you work with to secure that compliance? And also, which client of yours has a similar footprint to ours that we can speak to? Because if there are organizations out there that have a similar footprint and they would have already done their kind of audit of what the service providers are offering in terms of the VAT compliancy, then you can have a sense of trust that they've already done the work for you and you can go ahead. I do think probably at this stage it's absolutely critical to make sure that you are dealing with a service provider that is VAT compliant. But sometimes I don't think it's worth spending £10,000 or £20,000 to get a tax experts crawling all over the service providers to make sure that they're doing everything right. I think that might be money that's not well spent. if you can speak to other clients of the service provider and they've already done that due diligence a long, long time ago. So just bear that in mind. Okay. Another consideration is, are you an open or a closed network? Something that's come up in the last kind of couple of years is interoperability of networks. I think a key question is, do you, to your service provider, is do you actually accept transactions sent from another network? Will you kind of interoperate if needed? The majority of service providers will. And you'll have some service providers who proactively go out and want to interoperate with others, and others who don't proactively go out and interoperate, but they will actually take flows from other service providers. So it's good for you to know that they're not what you would call kind of a closed network. But in honesty, I don't think there are many closed networks out in the market. Most of them will interoperate with each other when there is a demand for it. If a service provider approaches you, you want to know with the service provider, if another service provider interconnects with you, what is your stance? As I say, you want to make sure that they will interoperate. So that's a key consideration. In terms of technology, this is key. It's key because you want to make sure that the technology makes it easy for a supplier. So do you take any file format or many file formats? Ideally, the service provider will take any file format. How do you check if they genuinely do take any file formats? Well, the questions that you need to ask is, how many formats do you have on your system? If they're processing invoices from, say, 50, 60,000 invoices, then you would want them to have thousands of formats in the system. Also, if they genuinely do take any file format, then they should have some kind of mapping functionality going on within their four walls, because they're drawing up unique maps for each of their suppliers. So that's another indicator that they will actually take any file format. The many file format providers may have a list or so of file formats that you can select from. It's still a little bit prescriptive for some suppliers who have bespoken their system so much. But you know, if a service provider has a list of, say, 40 or 50 file formats that they can receive, then it should be relatively straightforward for a supplier to use. And you just need to be aware that if work is needed, tweaking work is needed for a supplier to use one of those many file format types, you just need to know how much that's going to cost a supplier. Is there software involved? Ideally there isn't. What's the solution for large or small suppliers? What further technology functionality do you have? Will you integrate with our ERP? Actually I don't know of a single e-invoicing provider that doesn't integrate with every single ERP. It's just a given that they do. In terms of financial stability, you obviously want to make sure that the service provider that you sign up to is financially stable, and that they're going to be around in 3 or 4 years. And as I said, a lot of them, we've got new service providers appearing each year, so you know they're not going to have tons of money in the bank. But what you want to make sure of is that they have a strong forecast, and that they have investors who genuinely believe in them, and that they do have cash to spend on this. So those really are the key questions that you want to be asking. At the other end, you've got providers that have been in existence since the mid-90s who have a lot of cash. So again, you just want to be asking yourself, obviously, about are they preferential for you because of their financial situation. But as I say, it's a new market and there are new players coming into it. So although profit and loss sheets might not be as compelling as you might want them to be, you do want, obviously, then for them to have strong backing. And also, critically, if you stopped doing business now with the market, how long would your cash reserves last for? So this is a key question that I urge you to ask. And also, what are your future plans? What are you doing in terms of your exit strategy? Are you looking to be bought by whoever, an HP, an IBM? You know, be aware of these questions, because you are looking to buy into what will be a long-term relationship. Okay, in terms of commercials, it's obviously very, very important that you know how you will be charged. and of course you will have to pay for this service, and you want to know the length of the contract. You might get a better rate if you go for a 5-year contract or a 7-year contract instead of a 3-year contract, so bear that in mind. Normally there's a kind of a setup fee and a transaction fee. You might be able to play with the two and put in a higher setup fee but have a lower transaction fee. That will help you in the longer term. Just be aware of what all the extras are. You don't want any hidden costs along the way. How will you charge the supplier? This is key. So there are some service providers who are very clear about the supplier onboarding costs, and there are some that say that they're free. The ones where they say that they're free, I think that's very believable, but there may be other costs along the way for doing other work. So again, just be clear of what all the the costs are right up front. And to set up a supplier, and if it is many-to-many, what fees will be charged to a supplier? Again, this is key, because if a supplier is sending a file to the service provider, or wants to send a file to the service provider, and it doesn't kind of conscribe to the list of many, then some work will be done, and it will cost the supplier a little bit of money. So just be very aware of what it is that you're buying into. Okay, I'm conscious of time, so wanting to press on. How do you weight the responses? If I was putting together an RFP, I would make sure, I remember selling e-invoicing, and my heart would break when some RFPs would come through the door and there are only 2 questions on supplier onboarding. To me, it just didn't make sense, and it just illustrated that the market wasn't kind of cottoning on to the fact that this is a service that you're buying into. It's not really about technology as such. It is a service. So make sure you have a very big part of your RFP or your requirements focusing on supplier onboarding, and I would definitely give it around 20% in terms of weighting. VAT status, key, so give that about 20% as well. Technology, key. As I say, many-to-many, but with a very, very, very long list, or ideally any-to-any technology. And there are a lot of providers now moving to the any-to-any space. Commercials in terms of business case, again, a key, but I'd give that about 15%. Are you open versus closed? I would give that about 10%. And the financials of the organization in terms of the financial stability, I'd give that about 15%. Okay, moving into the last section, how to make your actual selection. Have a very clear go-live date. Work backwards from that go-live date. Just to be absolutely clear, if you wanted to go live with your first transaction in November, then you would need to have a contract signed with your service provider, probably in August, early September. And then you just need to make sure that you are asking the market and issuing RFPs probably around June time, maybe even earlier, May or June, which means you need to start doing everything that we've been talking about here pretty much now. So it's not something that you can just push through really, really quickly. It does need a lot of time. Issue the RFP once you've kind of got that written up, but I urge you, maybe not an exhaustive RFP, doesn't need to be exhaustive, but have an idea of what your requirements are before you go to the market, and issue an RFP if you choose to. But I don't think it's something that you need to make it kind of the size of a telephone book. Do shortlist around 3. Have the service providers come and defend their responses to the RFP. Do have some kind of beauty parade. Then reduce it down to 2 to aid negotiation. Remember that service providers have sales targets and quarters as well. They like the end of the quarter. Get to know what their financial year is and get to know what their quarters are. So that might aid you with a better negotiation. Use this stuff. It might help you get a better deal. Lock in the program manager if you like them. They are key to your program. And plan the implementation resource nice and early. Let everybody in procurement know what you're doing and why, and get your kickoff scheduled in nice and early. Make sure procurement are actually there. Use your service provider's contracts. Chances are, in your suite of the legal department, you do not have the right kind of contracts. So use your service provider's contract. In summary, know your as-is, understand where 80% of your invoice volumes are actually coming from, and focus on that. So it probably boil down to 10 or 20% of your suppliers. Get procurement's buy-in right at the beginning and have them on the team. Recognize that e-invoicing is absolutely a service. It's a supplier onboarding service, and it's not just a technology. It's a program and not a technology project. Do you know the technology limitations and impossibilities of your service provider? Know that you are actually ready for e-invoicing. So this is going right the way back to the beginning of this session. And make sure that you meet your program manager before you actually sign the contract. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was quite a speedy working through, and you'll see that we haven't even gone into applying the actually making sure that an e-invoicing project is successful once you get into the project. This is all the early stuff for when you've actually made the selection. So we've got a few minutes for some questions, which I'd just like to share with you now. Please do stay on the line for the next couple of minutes because we do have a raffle coming up, and I really would like you to be part of that. So we've got about 4 minutes. I'm looking not to go over time. Okay, so one of the first questions that we've got is here. One thing missing is a supplier experience from the onboarding process. Should we also ask to speak to suppliers that have onboarded with that provider? Absolutely, I think that's key. So there are many service providers out there, and if you are aware of some of your service providers, sorry, of some of your suppliers that have already got a connection with some service providers, yeah, absolutely ask them about it, and interview them about it. What did they like? What didn't they like? How professional were the people that onboarded them? How quickly or slowly did it take to onboard them? What was the technical support? Ask all these questions. It's absolutely key that you get a reference call from another buyer, but also from a supplier. And who better to have as a supplier referee than one of your own suppliers? Another question, is there a danger of hurting our relationships with our suppliers if we hand over the conversation to a service provider? Well, this is why it's key that you get a service provider that you trust, and you need to go and spend time with them to make sure that you trust them. You're going into a relationship here, and I think that's the key. It's not a fling, and you know, it's not. As I say, it's not a technology-based project. It is a supplier onboarding program. So go and spend time with them to make sure you trust the people who are going to be calling your suppliers. And if they do it right, then nobody's going to be upset. And if they sell the messages correctly, again, nobody should be upset by that. Okay, if your billing department is currently submitting its bills via one of the service providers, are there benefits in considering this vendor for the AP side as well? Of course there are. But don't be blind to the limitations that the service provider might have. Billing is actually quite simple in, technically. It's the other end, which is the hard piece. So if a service provider is doing very well at the billing piece, don't naturally assume that they're going to do the accounts payable side as equally well. So have them, absolutely include them in your RFP, but don't do that to the detriment of other service providers out there. It might give them a kind of preferential treatment, but as I say, don't exclude other service providers as well. Okay, and I think we've got time for one more question. What comes first, conversion to e-invoicing or streamlining the e-invoice management process with workflow scanning of paper? Scanning and data capture has a very, very big place in the world of shared services and accounts payable, and it will continue to do so. I know organisations that have really rolled out the two concurrently because they see them as very complementary solutions. A lot of organisations will go to scanning and data capture and workflow first because they think it will, because their first-time match rate is low, and they see it perhaps as a solution that they could put in place to glean some kind of savings while they still have a broken process. If your process isn't broken and you've got a high first-time match rate, why not just move straight to pure electronic but have some kind of data capture process in place to scoop up the residual paper that you will have and you will continue to have. Right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be moving to a close, but I've got a couple more questions for you. I'd just like to ask you, in your opinion, who you perceive as the market leader in Europe today. We're not going to show these results, but everybody that responds will be entered into a raffle, and we will be selecting 2 lucky winners to have to come as my guest. I'm going to be chairing the conference as my guest to the European Summit on Finance, Shared Services and Outsourcing, taking place 15th to the 17th March this year in London. So please, please, please do respond to this. It's very, very interesting market research. So 41% of you have voted. Please continue to vote. I'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, and similarly, I would just like to ask a similar question. Globally, who do you believe is the market leader? You've only got one choice for this. Again, those of you that enter will be entering you into a raffle, and the grand prize is to be my guest at the European Summit on Finance, Shared Services and Outsourcing. Just waiting for a few more of you to come back. If you can do, that would be great. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much. That's very useful market research that we've just done there. Okay. Briefly, now waiting to be played at sharedserviceslink.com. Kill the paper invoice. This is great for you if you are looking to do e-invoicing. Send it round to your procurement team as an internal communications program, and they begin to realize the importance of e-invoicing. We have a leaderboard at the moment. At the top we have Rudy from Janssen Pharmaceuticals, and you can see the other winners there. At the end of this month, the top 5 will each be receiving a complimentary iPad courtesy of sharedserviceslink.com. So if you haven't played it, do go onto our site and play it now. I'm looking forward to welcoming you next month, 3 p.m. Wednesday, 23rd of February. We've got the East Lancs e-invoicing story. And a date for your diary, please. Do join us at e-Invoicing Europe 2011, taking place 5th to the 7th of July, and that's taking place in London. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention, and I look forward to welcoming you next time.